The waitress saw him dying and clutching his twins. She didn't know he was the Mafia boss. The rain had been falling over downtown for nearly 4 hours. The kind of November rain that turned city streets into rivers and made the neon signs blur like watercolor paint. Pénélope Tollmache watched the droplets streak down the front window of the Iron Skillet, her reflection pale and ghostly in the glass. The diner's vintage sign flickered above, casting amber and red shadows across the slick pavement of the nearly deserted street. Before we dive in, hit like, share, and subscribe so you never miss more amazing stories. Thanks for the support. Pénélope, honey, you still here? Marcel's voice cut through her thoughts. The 65-year-old cook was already untying his grease-stained apron, ready to clock out. Pénélope glanced at the clock above the kitchen pass-through. 11:42 p.m. Yeah, just need to wipe down the back booths, she said, gesturing to the empty section where a late-shift trucker had nursed his coffee an hour ago. Leave it, Marcel said, waving dismissively. You've been here since 1. That's more than a double, kid. Pénélope managed a tired smile. Thanks, Marcel. I'll just take the trash out on my way. Course you will, Marcel muttered, but there was affection in his tone. Don't forget your umbrella this time. Pénélope retrieved her worn gray cardigan from the hook near the kitchen and grabbed the 2 trash bags sitting by the back door. The umbrella leaned against the wall right where she'd left it that morning. She picked it up, then set it back down. The dumpsters were only 30 feet away. She'd survived worse. The kitchen's fluorescent lights hummed as she pushed through the steel back door into the alley. The rain hit her immediately, cold and relentless. Pénélope hefted the trash bags and moved quickly toward the dumpsters at the far end of the narrow passage between the Iron Skillet and the abandoned furniture warehouse next door. The city at night had a particular rhythm: distant sirens, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the constant pulse of a place that never quite slept. Pénélope had lived here her whole 28 years. She knew which blocks to avoid after dark, which shortcuts to take, how to keep her head down and her keys between her fingers. She tossed the first bag into the dumpster, the metallic clang echoing off the brick walls. As she lifted the second bag, a sound made her freeze. Crying. Not the mewling of a cat or the wail of a distant siren. The desperate, hiccuping cry of an infant. Pénélope's heart seized. She dropped the trash bag, its contents spilling forgotten at her feet. The sound came from behind the larger dumpster, deeper in the shadows where the alley dead-ended. Hello. Her voice came out uncertain, swallowed by the rain. Is someone there? The crying intensified, now clearly 2 different voices. 2 babies. Pénélope's feet moved before her mind fully processed what she was doing. She rounded the dumpster, her eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. The narrow beam of the security light from the diner's back door barely reached this far. Then she saw them. 2 newborn infants wrapped in white linen, nestled against the chest of a man slumped against the brick wall. The babies, they couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, were crying, their tiny faces red and scrunched with distress. But it was the man beside them that made Pénélope's breath catch in her throat. He was propped against the wall, his expensive dark suit soaked through, one hand gripping the bundles with white-knuckled desperation. Even in the dim light, Pénélope could see the dark stains spreading across his abdomen, mixing with the rain that plastered his black hair to his forehead. Blood pooled beneath him, diluted by rainwater, spreading in crimson tendrils across the uneven pavement. Oh my God, Pénélope breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. The puddles soaked through her uniform instantly, but she barely noticed. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? The man's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, nearly black in the shadows, filled with pain and something else. Fear. Not for himself, Pénélope realized, but for the crying infants in his arms. Please, his voice was barely above a whisper, heavily accented Italian, she thought. Please, no hospital. They'll take my boys. His head lolled to the side, consciousness slipping. Penelope's hands shook as she pressed them against his abdomen, feeling the warm wetness seep between her fingers. She'd done clinical rotations before dropping out of nursing school 3 years ago, enough to know this was serious. The wound was still bleeding, though not as heavily as it must have been initially. But his skin was cold, far too cold, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "I need to call 911, Penelope said, more to herself than to him. She fumbled for her phone with blood-slicked fingers. "No." His hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping her wrist. His eyes locked onto hers with fierce intensity. "No police. No hospital. They're on peril. They'll kill the children." "You need medical attention," Penelope insisted, but her voice wavered. Something in his desperation gave her pause. "Please." The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Please." Penelope's mind raced. Every rational thought screamed at her to call for help, to do the right thing, the legal thing. But she looked at the 2 newborns, still crying against this man's chest, and then back at him, barely clinging to consciousness yet still holding them with everything he had left. She thought of her mother, bleeding out on a hospital gurney 2 years ago, while doctors who didn't care enough worked too slowly. She thought of the infection that should have been caught, the negligence that was ruled unfortunate but not actionable. She thought of all the nights since then she'd lain awake wondering if she could have done more, saved her somehow, if she'd just had the courage to finish her degree, to trust herself. "Okay," Penelope heard herself say. "Okay, but we need to move you. Can you stand?" He nodded weakly. Penelope knew it was probably a lie, but they had to try. She looked at the babies. "Are they yours?" "My son's." Pride flickered in his eyes even through the pain. "Elio. Silas." "Okay. Elio and Silas are coming too." Penelope made the decision in that instant, understanding somewhere in the back of her mind that nothing in her life would be the same after this moment. She carefully took the first infant, Elio, based on the small E embroidered on the white linen. Then Silas. They were impossibly light, warm, and real in her hands. Setting them carefully on a dry patch under the fire escape where the rain couldn't reach, she returned to the man. "I'm going to help you stand. My car is just 30 feet away. Can you make it?" He nodded again, and Penelope slid her shoulder under his arm, bracing herself against his weight. He was tall, easily 6'2", and solidly built under the expensive suit that was now ruined with rain and blood. On 3, Penelope counted. 1, 2, 3. They rose together, his weight nearly buckling her knees. He bit back a groan, and Penelope felt him trembling with the effort of staying upright. Step by agonizing step, they made their way toward the mouth of the alley where Penelope's beat-up Honda sedan sat under a broken street lamp. "Wait here," she panted, propping him against the car's side. She ran back for the babies, scooping them both against her chest. Her arms burned with the effort, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The car's passenger door squealed as she yanked it open. She secured the infants in the back seat, tucking them into the space between fast food wrappers and her gym bag she never used, creating a makeshift nest with her cardigan. The babies had quieted to whimpers, their wide eyes watching her with that peculiar awareness newborns sometimes have. "It's okay," Penelope murmured to them, though she had no idea if that was true. "It's going to be okay." The man had slid down the side of the car by the time she returned to him. Penelope's heart hammered as she helped him into the passenger seat. His head fell back against the headrest, his breathing labored. "Stay with me," Penelope said firmly, slamming the door and racing around to the driver's side. The engine coughed twice before turning over. Penelope's hands white-knuckled the steering wheel as she pulled away from the diner, her eyes darting between the road and the man beside her. His watch, she could see it now in the dim glow of the dashboard, was a Patek Philippe. The suit, even ruined, was clearly hand-tailored. His shoes were Italian leather, the kind that cost more than Penelope made in 3 months. What had she gotten herself into? The drive to her basement apartment usually took 20 minutes. Penelope made it in 14, running one red light and pushing her Honda to speeds that made the frame rattle. She kept talking the whole way, partly to keep him conscious and partly to keep herself from panicking. I'm Penelope, by the way. Pénélope Tollmache. I live alone. Well, I guess not anymore. At least for tonight. My apartment's small, really small, but it's clean. I have some medical supplies. I used to be in nursing school. Did I mention that? 3 years at the community college before I dropped out. My mom got sick. Cancer. And I couldn't. Anyway, I remember enough. I think. God, I hope I remember enough. The man, she still didn't know his name, made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. In the back seat, one of the twins started crying again, a tired, frightened sound that made Penelope's chest ache. Almost there, she promised them all. Almost there. Her apartment building was a converted old house in a forgotten neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business and the landlord only fixed things when they became health violations. Penelope parked as close to the basement entrance as possible and sat for a moment, her hands still gripping the wheel, reality crashing over her. She had just brought a wounded stranger and 2 newborn babies to her home. She hadn't called the police. She had no idea what had happened to him, who he was running from, or why he was so desperate to avoid hospitals. The man's hand touched her arm, making her jump. His eyes were open, clearer now despite the pain etched in every line of his face. "Thank you," he said simply. Those 2 words, spoken with such genuine gratitude, steadied something in Penelope. She nodded. "Let's get you inside." Getting him down the 6 concrete steps to her basement door was a nightmare. The man could barely stand, let alone navigate stairs. Penelope half carried, half dragged him, pausing every few steps to let him breathe. Mr. Kowalski from the upstairs unit opened his door at the commotion, took one look at them, and closed it again without a word. Penelope had never been more grateful for her neighbor's indifference. By the time they reached her apartment door, Penelope was shaking with exhaustion. She fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open, and guided the man straight to her small futon couch. He collapsed onto it with a sound that was part relief, part pain. Penelope ran back up for the babies, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite her burning legs. The twins were miraculously quiet now, their eyes drooping with exhaustion. Penelope gathered them both carefully and made the descent again, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Inside her apartment, she set the babies down carefully on her bed and locked the door, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing hard, looking at the scene before her. Her tiny basement studio, with its secondhand furniture and collection of nursing textbooks she'd never sold back, now contained a severely injured man bleeding on her futon and 2 newborn twins swaddled in expensive white linen on her unmade bed. The absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she had to suppress a hysterical laugh. "Okay," Penelope said out loud, forcing herself into action. "Okay." The rain didn't wash the blood away. It just made it spread faster. But it wasn't the man's expensive suit that stopped Penelope's heart, it was the 2 silent, white bundles in his arms. Penelope just made a choice that will change her life forever. She chose compassion over safety, instinct over logic. If you believe in helping those who have nowhere else to turn, hit that subscribe button right now. Only heartless people who'd leave a dying man and 2 babies in the rain will scroll past this. Don't be that person. Penelope's basement apartment didn't have an elevator. She'd lied about that in the car, her mind scrambling for any way to make this impossible situation seem manageable. Now, staring at the man slumped on her futon, she realized the real problem wasn't getting him down 6 steps, it was what came after. "I need to clean up the blood," she said, more to herself than to him. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The twins had finally fallen asleep on her bed, their small chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. Penelope grabbed the 2 trash bags she'd brought in and ran back up the concrete steps. The November rain was still falling, heavier now, but it hadn't washed away the blood trail. Dark streaks led from her car to the basement entrance, pooled on the landing, smeared on her doorframe. Her hands shook as she tore open the first trash bag and spread it flat across the blood-stained concrete. She used the second bag the same way, covering the evidence like a morbid carpet. Rain pelted her back, soaking through her uniform until she was shivering. A car passed on the street above, its headlights sweeping across the building's facade, and Penelope froze, waiting for it to slow down, for someone to see. The car kept going. She grabbed fallen leaves from the gutter, scattered them across the makeshift covering, then hurried back inside and locked the door behind her. The apartment felt smaller now. The man, she still didn't know his name, took up most of her futon. The twins took up her bed. Penelope stood in the middle of her 12 by 15-foot studio, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. One window at ground level. One door. No back exit. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, kneeling beside the futon. The man's eyes fluttered open. "Elias," he rasped. "My brother. Not by blood. By choice." His jaw clenched, pain and betrayal warring in his expression. 20 years. I made him my second. Trusted him with everything. Why would he? Power. The word came out bitter. Always power. His hand moved to his abdomen, pressing against the wound. He killed my wife. Tonight, he tried to finish what he started. Penelope's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random mugging. This wasn't gang violence. This was execution. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, forcing herself to focus. "I need to see the wound." As she helped him remove his ruined jacket, her fingers brushed against something hard in the inner pocket. A gun. Her heart seized. She pulled back instinctively. The man, Carmine, she'd glimpsed the name on a blood-stained business card that had fallen from his pocket, caught her wrist gently. "For protection," he said. "Not for you. Never for you." Penelope nodded, though fear coiled tight in her stomach. She'd brought a dying man into her home. A man with enemies. A man who carried weapons. A man whose brother had tried to murder him and his newborn sons. Carmine was betrayed by his closest friend. If you hate backstabbers and snakes who turn on their family, hit subscribe. Only traitors will scroll past this. The vodka wasn't for drinking. Penelope kept it in the freezer for the migraines that sometimes hit after double shifts, her mother's old remedy. Now she poured it over Carmine's abdomen, watching him bite down on a folded dish towel to keep from screaming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hands steadier than they had any right to be. "This is going to hurt." The bullet had gone clean through, thank God. Entry wound in the front, exit in the back. But the tissue was torn, bleeding sluggishly, and without proper surgical tools, Penelope had only one option. Her sewing kit sat on the kitchen table, the same one she'd used to hem her work uniforms. She threaded the needle with black thread, the closest thing she had to surgical suture, and doused it in vodka. "Ready?" she asked. Carmine's eyes met hers, dark and fierce even through the pain. He nodded once. The first puncture made him go rigid. The second pulled a low groan from his throat. By the third stitch, his hand had locked around the edge of the futon, knuckles white. Penelope worked quickly, her mind retreating to the clinical detachment she'd learned in nursing school. This wasn't a man. This was tissue. Dermis. Fascia. Just layers that needed closing. She'd sewn 5 stitches when Carmine's eyes rolled back. No, 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 stay with me, Penelope said, checking his pulse. Still there. Thready but steady. He'd passed up from the pain. She finished the remaining 7 stitches in silence, then flipped him carefully to address the exit wound. Her back screamed in protest. Her hands cramped. But she didn't stop until both wounds were closed, messy but functional. Penelope was cleaning the blood from her hands when the crying started. Both twins wailed in unison, that particular newborn shriek that signaled hunger. Penelope glanced at the microwave clock, 2:47 a.m. When had they last eaten? 4 hours ago? 6? She rushed to the bed, scooping up Elio, or was it Silas? She couldn't tell them apart in the dim light. The baby rooted against her shoulder, searching desperately for food she couldn't provide. Okay, shhh, she murmured, rocking him while reaching for the second twin. Both boys screamed, their faces red and angry. Formula. She needed formula. And bottles. And diapers. God, when had she last changed them? Penelope's apartment had none of these things. The corner bodega wouldn't open for another 4 hours. Her mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. She couldn't leave Carmine alone, bleeding and unconscious. She couldn't take the babies out at 3 a.m. She couldn't ask a neighbor for help without raising questions. The twins' cries grew more frantic. Penelope grabbed her phone with shaking hands and typed, "Emergency formula substitute for newborns 3 a.m." The search results made her stomach drop. Every article said the same thing: don't improvise. Don't experiment. Don't risk it. But the babies were screaming, and she had no choice. She had to try something. Anything. By November 14th, Penelope had been awake for 36 hours straight. The twins had finally accepted the diluted evaporated milk mixture she'd concocted from a decades-old cookbook, but Carmine was getting worse. His fever had spiked sometime during the night. Now, at 6:15 a.m., he thrashed on the futon, muttering in Italian and broken English. Penelope pressed a cold washcloth to his forehead, but it did little to calm him. The shipment. Thursday, the docks, he mumbled, his eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids. Elias knows. He knows everything. Shoo, you need to rest, Penelope whispered, checking his stitches. No signs of infection yet, but the fever worried her. She'd given him the last of her ibuprofen hours ago. He'll come for them. Carmine's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. Don't trust anyone. Not the police. Not the hospitals. They're all his now. I won't, Penelope promised, gently prying his fingers loose. The boys are safe. I'm keeping them safe. His eyes rolled back, and he fell into fitful sleep again. Penelope's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Marcel's name flashed across the screen. Her shift had started 15 minutes ago. She stared at the phone, then at Carmine, then at the twins sleeping in a makeshift bassinet she'd created from a laundry basket and towels. If she went to work, who would watch them? If she called in sick again, she'd already used her excuse yesterday. Marcel would start asking questions. Or worse, he'd fire her. The Iron Skillet wasn't much, but it was her lifeline. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her car insurance was overdue. She had $247 in her checking account and 3 cans of soup in her cupboard. The phone buzzed again. Penelope answered. Marcel, where are you? His voice was sharp. This is the second day, Penelope. I got customers waiting and I'm down a server. I know, I'm so sorry. I'm really sick. Some kind of flu. You were fine 2 days ago. It came on fast. The lie tasted bitter. I can barely get out of bed. Silence on the other end. Then, you got a doctor's note? Penelope's heart sank. Not yet. I was going to. Then you better get one. Because if you're not here tomorrow with proof, don't bother coming back. The line went dead. Penelope set the phone down carefully, her hands trembling. 3 years she'd worked at that diner. 3 years of covering for people, taking the worst shifts, never complaining. And now she was one missed day away from unemployment. Behind her, Carmine moaned. Elias, the shipment. Penelope turned back to him, checking his fever again. Still burning. She reached into his jacket pocket for the spare washcloth she'd placed there and felt something hard and rectangular. Her fingers closed around it. A phone. Small, cheap, plastic. A burner. She pulled it out, staring at the dark screen. One button press, and it would light up. One button press, and maybe she could call whoever Carmine trusted. Get him real help. Get him out of her apartment. Get her life back. But Carmine's words echoed in her mind. Don't trust anyone. They're all his now. Penelope placed the phone on the counter, not turning it on. Not yet. Not until she knew it was safe. If that moment ever came. Penelope is risking her only source of income to save a stranger. If you believe in helping those in need, comment, humanity first. If you'd leave him to die, keep scrolling. The knock came at 11 a.m. on November 15th, sharp and demanding. 3 deliberate raps that made Penelope's blood freeze. Miss Tollmache, I know you're in there. Mr. Henderson. Her landlord. Penelope glanced frantically around the apartment. Carmine was still on the futon, his fever finally broken, but his face pale and drawn. The twins slept in their laundry basket. Bloody towels sat in a trash bag by the bathroom. Her ruined uniform hung over the shower rod, rust-colored stains still visible despite her scrubbing. Just a minute, she called, her voice pitched higher than normal. She grabbed the trash bag and shoved it into the kitchen cabinet under the sink, then threw a blanket over Carmine. He stirred but didn't wake. The twins remained mercifully silent. Penelope cracked the door open, keeping her body in the gap. Mr. Henderson stood on the landing, his bulk blocking what little light filtered down to the basement level. He was 60-something, perpetually red-faced, and always smelled like cigarettes and cheap cologne. Rent's due, he said flatly. Today. I don't see a check in my box. I know, Mr. Henderson. I'll have it tomorrow, I promise. I've just been. Tomorrow's what you said last month. His eyes tried to peer past her into the apartment. What's that smell? Penelope's heart hammered. Vodka. Antiseptic. Blood. Cleaning supplies. I was doing some deep cleaning. At 11 in the morning on a workday? His eyebrows rose. Thought you worked mornings at that diner. I called in sick. Sick enough to clean, but not sick enough to work? He pushed against the door slightly. I'm coming in to check the smoke detectors. Landlord's right. Penelope's hand pressed against the door, holding it firm. No. Henderson blinked. Excuse me. I said no. Something hardened in Penelope's voice, a steel she didn't know she possessed. You need to give 24 hours notice for inspections. That's the law. I know my rights. Your rights. Henderson's face flushed darker. You're 3 days late on rent and you're talking about rights? I'll have your money tomorrow. But you're not coming in today. They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Penelope had never stood up to him before. Never challenged him when he raised the rent without warning. Never complained when he took 2 months to fix her broken heater. Never argued when he tried to charge her for damages that were there when she moved in. But this was different. Behind her were 2 newborns and a man who would die if anyone found him. Tomorrow, Henderson finally said, stepping back. Noon. Cash. Or I start eviction proceedings. He turned and climbed the stairs, muttering under his breath. Penelope closed the door and locked it, her whole body trembling. She slid down to the floor, her back against the door, trying to catch her breath. You have fire in you. Penelope's head snapped up. Carmine was awake, propped slightly on one elbow, watching her with clear eyes. The fever haze was gone. How long have you been awake? She asked. Long enough. He grimaced, touching his abdomen carefully. Long enough to see you protect me from that bastard. He's my landlord. He has a right to. No one has the right to intimidate you in your own home. Carmine's voice was quiet but firm. You stood your ground. That takes courage. Penelope moved to his side, checking his forehead. Cool. The fever had broken completely. How do you feel? Like I've been shot. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But alive. Because of you. He caught her hand gently. You deserve to know who you saved. My name is Carmine Berardo. And I'm not a good man, Penelope. She waited. I run the Berardo family. Shipping, imports, territory from here to Philadelphia. His eyes held hers. People call me a crime boss. They're not wrong. By November 16th, they were out of everything. Diapers, formula, bandages, even the diluted milk solution Penelope had been using. Carmine's stitches needed proper antibiotics or infection would set in again. She had no choice but to venture out. I'll be back in an hour, she told Carmine, pulling on her jacket. Don't answer the door for anyone. Take this. He pulled a roll of bills from his jacket pocket, hundreds, at least 20 of them. Penelope's eyes widened. I can't. You can. You've earned it 10 times over. His expression softened. And Penelope? Be careful. Elias has eyes everywhere. The morning air was crisp and cold, last week's rain replaced by gray November skies. Penelope kept her head down as she walked the 4 blocks to the pharmacy, her breath forming small clouds. That's when she saw the first poster. Taped to a telephone pole, fluttering in the wind. Missing. Carmine Berardo's face stared back at her, a professional photo, probably from some business function. Below it, last seen November 12th. If you have information, contact Detective Raymond Thorne. Thorne. Not the police department's main line. A direct number to a detective. Penelope's stomach turned. She kept walking and saw another poster. Then another. They were everywhere, on bus stops, storefront windows, traffic lights. Someone had blanketed the neighborhood overnight. But something was wrong. The posters were too clean, too new. Missing person cases didn't get this kind of coverage unless the person was a child or someone famous. And the photo, it was high-quality formal. Not the kind of picture a worried family member would have on hand. These weren't real missing posters. They were bait. Penelope pulled her hood up and hurried into the pharmacy. She grabbed diapers, formula, gauze, antibiotic ointment, and a bottle of actual ibuprofen. The clerk barely looked at her as she paid cash. On her way back, she passed the Iron Skillet. Old habit made her glance through the window. Marcel was behind the counter, serving the lunch rush. And sitting in booth 3, nursing a coffee, was a man she'd never seen before. He was broad-shouldered, maybe 40, with a shaved head and something dark crawling up his neck from beneath his collar. A tattoo. He was talking to Marcel, showing him something on his phone. Marcel shook his head. The man leaned closer, more insistent. Penelope's feet carried her across the street before her brain caught up. She ducked into the bodega, positioning herself where she could see through both windows, the diner and the street. The man stood, leaving money on the table. He stepped outside, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Penelope couldn't hear the words, but she saw his mouth move. Nothing yet. He looked up and down the street, his eyes scanning faces, searching. Penelope turned away before he could spot her watching. She waited 5 minutes, then 10, until the man finally climbed into a black SUV and drove off. Her hands shook as she walked back to the apartment, the grocery bags suddenly feeling like they weighed 100 pounds each. She'd been careful. She'd covered her tracks. But they were looking. Actively hunting. And they were close. Too close. When she opened the apartment door, Carmine took one look at her face and knew. They're here, she said simply. They're searching the neighborhood. Carmine's jaw tightened. He pushed himself up straighter despite the pain. Then we're running out of time. The system is rigged against them. If you're tired of corrupt systems and unfair fights, hit the like button. Don't let the bullies win. November 17th brought the first quiet evening since the alley. No knocks at the door. No fever dreams. No sirens in the distance that made Penelope's heart stop. Just the soft sounds of two babies and the low hum of her ancient radiator. Carmine sat propped against the arm of the futon, his color finally returning. He cradled Elio against his chest with practiced ease, one large hand supporting the infant's head. Penelope sat cross-legged on the floor with Silas, guiding the bottle to his searching mouth. "You're good with them," she said quietly. "Natural. Their mother taught me." Carmine's voice went soft. "In the 3 weeks we had together." Penelope looked up. 3 weeks. She died in childbirth. Complications. His thumb traced gentle circles on Elio's back. The doctors said it was fast. That she didn't suffer. I don't know if they were lying to spare me. I'm sorry. Her name was Juliana. We'd known each other since we were children in Napoli. I brought her here, promised her safety, a good life. His jaw tightened. Instead, I gave her 2 sons she never got to raise. Silas finished his bottle, and Penelope lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. She gave you them, though. That counts for something. Does it? Carmine's eyes were distant. What kind of life can I give them? Running. Hiding. Always looking over their shoulders. A life where they're loved, Penelope said. That's more than some kids get. They sat in silence for a moment. Elio made a small sound, and Carmine adjusted his hold, natural and protective. What about you? He asked. The medical supplies, the way you stitched me up, you said you were in nursing school? Penelope nodded, focusing on Silas rather than meeting Carmine's eyes. 3 years. I was 6 months from graduating when my mother got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I dropped out to take care of her. That's admirable. It's stupid. The words came out sharper than she intended. She died anyway. And I was left with debt, no degree, and a job serving coffee to truckers. Some choice that was. You stayed with her. That matters. Does it? Penelope echoed his earlier words. I lost everything. My education, my future, She stopped herself. Your what? My courage. She finally looked at him. I used to think I could save people. That I'd be this amazing nurse who made a difference. Instead, I'm a waitress who can't even stand up to her landlord. You stood up to him yesterday. Because I had to. Because you and the boys needed me to. Carmine shifted, wincing slightly at the pull of his stitches. Maybe that's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but doing what's necessary despite it. Penelope felt something shift in her chest. In the low lamplight, with a sleeping infant in his arms and vulnerability in his eyes, Carmine didn't look like a crime boss. He looked like a father. A widower. A man trying desperately not to fail the only family he had left. Why did Elias do it? She asked. Why betray you? Because I chose Juliana over the business. Because I wanted to leave, take my family, and disappear. Carmine's voice dropped. In my world, wanting out is the greatest sin. And now? Now. He looked at his sleeping sons. Now I have no choice. For them, I have to survive. And then I have to decide if I reclaim what's mine or walk away forever. Penelope understood. She'd been asking herself the same question since the alley. When this was over, who would she be? The invisible waitress who kept her head down, or someone different? Someone who'd learned to fight back. Outside, a car passed. They both tensed, listening until the engine faded. Then Elio yawned, and the moment passed. Get some sleep, Carmine said. I'll take first watch. You need rest more than I do. Penelope. His eyes held hers. Thank you. For everything. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and settled onto her bed with Silas still in her arms. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay there in the dark, listening to Carmine's breathing, feeling the weight of the infant against her chest, and wondering when exactly this stopped being a rescue and started feeling like something else entirely. November 20th, 8 days since the alley. Carmine stood for the first time without assistance, his hand braced against the wall but his legs steady beneath him. The stitches held. The fever hadn't returned. His color was almost normal. "It's time," he said. Penelope knew what he meant. The burner phone sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left it, untouched, a small plastic rectangle that held both salvation and destruction. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" "I have to be." Carmine moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "Elias will have consolidated power by now. Every day I wait, he gets stronger. My people need to know I'm alive." "Your people," Penelope repeated. "The ones you trust?" "Antonio Gallo. My cousin, my enforcer. If anyone stayed loyal, it's him." Carmine turned to face her. "But the moment we turn that phone on, Elias will know too. He'll triangulate the signal. We'll have maybe an hour, probably less, before he sends people." "Then why do it?" "Because Antonio can get us out. He has safe houses, resources, men who'll fight." Carmine's expression hardened. "But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Once we make this call, this apartment becomes a battlefield." Penelope looked at the twins sleeping in their laundry basket, then at the small space she'd called home for 3 years. Her sanctuary. Her refuge from the world. "Tell me exactly what happens," she said. Carmine outlined the plan with military precision. "Turn on the phone for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to ping the network, short enough to prevent an immediate trace to the exact address." Antonio would receive the signal and know Carmine was alive and in this neighborhood. He'd mobilize a team and come in force. But Elias would receive the same signal. And he'd come faster, with more men, more desperate to finish what he'd started. "We need to fortify," Carmine said. "Block the windows. Barricade the door." "Do you have anything we can use as weapons?" Penelope mentally inventoried her apartment. Kitchen knives. A baseball bat she kept for protection but had never used. Cleaning supplies that could burn if ignited. "Not much," she admitted. "Then we improvise." Carmine's eyes met hers, serious and unflinching. "Penelope, you can still walk away. Take whatever money I have left and disappear. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is." The certainty in her own voice surprised her. "I made it my fight the moment I put you in my car." Something flickered across Carmine's face, respect, gratitude, perhaps something deeper. "Then let's make the call." Penelope picked up the burner phone, her thumb hovering over the power button. Her hand trembled slightly. 8 days ago, she'd been a waitress whose biggest problem was paying rent. Now she was about to declare war on a criminal empire. 30 seconds, Carmine confirmed. "Starting now." She pressed the button. The phone lit up, its screen glowing pale blue in the dim apartment. No messages. No missed calls. Just a signal pinging out into the void, a digital flare announcing, "We're here. Come find us." Penelope counted in her head. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The phone buzzed once, an incoming message. Carmine leaned over to read it. Location received. Hold position. 1 hour. Antonio. 28 seconds. 29. Penelope powered the phone off and set it down carefully, as if it might explode. "Now what?" she asked. Carmine moved to the door, testing its strength. "Now we prepare for hell." Outside, somewhere in the city, 2 forces mobilized. One to rescue. One to kill. And Pénélope Tollmache, waitress turned unlikely guardian, had exactly 1 hour to decide what kind of person she really was. It takes guts to face a monster. If you're not a coward, subscribe now. Only those who run from a fight will ignore this. They had 42 minutes to prepare before the first black SUV pulled up outside. Penelope watched through the gap in the curtains as 3 men emerged, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Professional. "They're here," she whispered. Carmine was already moving, scooping up both twins with practiced efficiency. The bathtub. Cast iron, safest place in the apartment. He moved toward the bathroom, then paused. "Remember what I taught you?" Penelope nodded, her hands closing around the gun he'd given her 20 minutes earlier. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold and foreign in her grip. She'd never fired a weapon in her life. Now she might have to kill someone with it. The building had advantages Carmine's men had immediately recognized. The basement entrance meant attackers had to come down exposed stairs. The narrow hallway created a bottleneck. And Penelope knew things about this building that no blueprint would show. She'd unscrewed the steam pipe valve in the hallway. Mr. Henderson had been meaning to fix the ancient heating system for years. Now scalding steam hissed into the corridor at ankle height, creating a curtain of heat. She'd loosened the fixture over the stairs, leaving the old light hanging by its wiring, ready to drop. And she'd poured dish soap mixed with water on the concrete landing. Amateur traps. Desperate measures. But maybe enough to buy time. The footsteps came heavy and confident down the stairs. No attempt at stealth. They knew Carmine was wounded, knew he had a civilian protecting him. They weren't expecting resistance. The first man hit the soapy landing and his feet went out from under him. He crashed down hard, his gun skittering across the concrete. Before he could recover, Penelope yanked the light fixture's support wire. The heavy brass fixture swung down like a pendulum, catching him across the temple. He went still. One down, Penelope breathed. The second man was smarter. He saw his partner fall and slowed, scanning for threats. But he didn't see the steam until he was in it, cursing as the heat hit his legs through his pants. That's when Penelope stepped into the hallway, the gun raised with both hands like Carmine had shown her. "Don't move." The man looked at her, really looked at her. Saw the gray uniform underneath her jacket. The exhaustion in her eyes. The trembling in her hands. He smiled. "Lady, you don't want to." Penelope pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked her, sending her back a step. The sound was impossibly loud in the confined space, her ears ringing instantly. The man grabbed his shoulder, staggering, blood blooming through his fingers. She'd aimed center mass like Carmine taught her. She'd hit high, but she'd hit him. "The next one goes in your chest," Penelope heard herself say, her voice steadier than her hands. "Leave. Now." The wounded man scrambled back up the stairs, leaving a blood trail. But there were more footsteps coming. Heavier. Multiple sets. Penelope backed toward her apartment door. Inside, she could hear one of the twins crying Silas, she thought, though she couldn't be sure anymore. Carmine would be in the bathroom, sheltering them both in the cast-iron tub, his own body as the final shield. The door to the hallway exploded inward. Not the apartment door, the building's exterior door. They'd kicked it off its hinges. Through the steam and smoke, Penelope could see shapes moving. 3, maybe 4 more men. She fired twice more, not aiming, just buying seconds. Glass shattered. Someone cursed. But they kept coming. Penelope retreated into her apartment and slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt. Carmine had wedged her bookshelf against it earlier, but it wouldn't hold long. Nothing would. "Carmine," she shouted. "Here." He emerged from the bathroom, his gun drawn despite his injuries. His face was pale but determined. "How many?" "Too many." They heard it then, the splintering crack of wood. The door shuddering in its frame. Another kick. Another crack. Carmine positioned himself beside the door, gesturing for Penelope to take cover behind the kitchen counter. Their eyes met across the small room. No words needed. If they were going down, they'd go down fighting. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. And then, from somewhere above, came the sound Penelope had been praying for: automatic gunfire. Shouts. The heavy thud of boots on stairs. Antonio's voice, commanding and furious. Clear the building. No. Penelope refuses to be a victim. Comment, I stand my ground if you're not a pushover. Haters and weaklings won't comment. Antonio Gallo was built like a boulder and moved like a freight train. He swept through the hallway with 6 men at his back, their weapons trained on every shadow. The siege ended as quickly as it began, Elias's men either dead or fleeing into the November night. Boss. Antonio's voice cracked with emotion when he saw Carmine. He crossed the ruined apartment in 3 strides and embraced him carefully, mindful of the healing wound. Everyone thought. I know. Carmine clasped his cousin's shoulder. But I'm alive. Thanks to her. Antonio turned to Penelope, really seeing her for the first time. Blood-spattered waitress uniform. Gun still gripped in white-knuckled hands. Eyes wild with adrenaline and fear. He gave her a respectful nod that said more than words could. We need to move, Antonio said. Elias knows where you are now. He'll send everything he has. The boys. Already handled. Daniela's outside with the car seat carriers. Antonio gestured to a woman in tactical gear standing in the doorway. She's a medic. Former Marine. Your sons will be safer with her than anywhere else. Carmine hesitated, then nodded. He moved to the bathroom and emerged with Elio and Silas, both miraculously calm despite the chaos. He handed them to Daniela with clear reluctance, watching as she secured them with practiced efficiency. The chopper's on the roof of the textile building, Antonio said. 3 minutes out. The textile building. The abandoned warehouse next to the Iron Skillet where this had all begun. Penelope felt the symmetry of it, a strange closing of the circle. Antonio's men moved like phantoms, clearing the building, establishing a perimeter. One of them handed Penelope a jacket, clean, warm, expensive. She put it on numbly, still processing what had just happened. She'd shot someone. She'd stood her ground against trained killers. She'd survived. They moved as a unit up the stairs and out into the cold night. The street was chaos, bullet casings glinting under streetlights, neighbors peering from windows, distant sirens wailing. But Antonio's team moved through it all with practiced efficiency, shepherding them toward the warehouse. The roof access was a rusted fire escape. Carmine climbed slowly, his healing wound protesting with each step. Penelope followed, her legs shaking with exhaustion and shock. Above them, the helicopter's rotors created a deafening whump-whump-whump, whipping her hair into her face. At the top, Carmine turned to face her. Behind him, the chopper waited, its door open. Inside, she could see Daniela securing the twins. Antonio was already climbing aboard, speaking urgently into a radio. Safety. Escape. A future beyond this nightmare. Carmine extended his hand to her. Come with us, he said, his voice barely audible over the rotors. Penelope looked at that offered hand. Then she looked back at the city spread below her city, her life for 28 years. The Iron Skillet's neon sign blinked in the distance. Her basement apartment, now destroyed, would never be home again. Mr. Henderson would evict her. Marcel had probably already hired her replacement. Everything she'd built, as small and insignificant as it was gone. But in the helicopter were 2 babies who'd learned to recognize her voice. A man who'd trusted her with his life and his sons. A future she never could have imagined in her old life of coffee stains and aching feet. What happens if I come? She asked. I don't know, Carmine admitted. But you'll be safe. You'll be protected. And you'll never have to be invisible again. Penelope thought of her mother, dying in a hospital bed, telling her to be brave. To take chances. To live before it was too late. She took his hand. The helicopter lifted off as the first police cars screamed onto the street below, their lights painting the night in red and blue. Penelope pressed her face to the window, watching her old life shrink and disappear. Beside her, Carmine's hand squeezed hers once, an anchor in the chaos. Forward. Always forward. 6 months later, the Amalfi Coast looked like a postcard brought to life. Penelope stood on the terrace of the villa, watching Elio and Silas crawl across a blanket spread on the sun-warmed stone. They were 8 months old now, sturdy and curious, their father's dark eyes and their mother's delicate features. Elio had just discovered his toes. Silas was more interested in the olive tree casting dappled shadows across the blanket. No gray uniform. No coffee-stained apron. Just a white linen dress and bare feet and the Mediterranean sun warming her shoulders. "You're smiling," Carmine said, emerging from the villa with 2 glasses of lemonade. He moved without pain now, the scar on his abdomen just another line in the map of his life. "I smile," Penelope protested. "Not like that. Not the waitress smile that never reaches your eyes." He handed her a glass and stood beside her, watching their sons. Their sons. When had she started thinking of them that way? Elias Thorne was dead. Antonio had seen to that personally, 3 weeks after the siege. The Berardo family was whole again, reorganized, stronger. But Carmine had kept his promise to Juliana's memory. He'd walked away from the empire, leaving it in Antonio's capable hands. Now he was just a father. And Penelope was, what? Not a waitress. Not a nurse. Something new. Something she was still learning to be. "Are you happy?" Carmine asked quietly. Penelope watched Silas giggle as his brother grabbed his foot. Watched the sun sparkle on the impossibly blue water. Felt the warmth of the man beside her, solid and real and alive. "Yes," she said, surprised by how true it was. "I think I am." Carmine's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. No grand declarations. No dramatic kisses. Just 2 people who'd survived hell together, building something gentle and real from the ashes. The rain in that alley had washed away her old life. But the sun had dried her tears and shown her something better. Something worth fighting for. Elio made a grab for the lemonade glass, and they both laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace and out over the sea, free and unafraid.